Hey, this is Chelsea Dupre, host of CJ and Sal. Thanks for listening to the following podcast on Public House Media.
This is The Leadership Show, the place where leaders learn more about themselves and how they can shift the way they lead. Because when leaders get better, families get better, communities get better, and the world gets better. And now your host, Chief Leadership Officer of Shepherd Revolution, David Prosper.
If this is your first time listening to The Leadership Show, we want to personally welcome you. We started this podcast because too many of us have been hurt, underappreciated, and abused by unhealthy leaders. And we believe that when leaders get better, our communities get better, our workplace gets better, our families get better, and ultimately our world gets better. We start our shows all the time with the verse of the day. And we can find our verse in Jeremiah 1 verses 5. It says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." Now, leaders, think about that. You're called to be set apart. And sometimes as being a leader, we have to separate ourselves from the bystanders, from those who are taking a new standard, versus the one who are following and the ones who are leading, and the one who know who they are, and then the one who are still trying to figure it out. And it's powerful. So think about that. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So before my mother called me David, before your mother called you the name that she called you, or your father, God knew you. And he called you not to just fit in, but to be different, to be unique. And I believe that we live in a world, in a culture where we give up and we want to just fit in because we don't want to have the ridicule and we want to be accepted. But I want to encourage you today that you're called to be different. You're called to be set apart. You're called to not just fit in, but to stand out. So again, Jeremiah 1 verses 5. "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." There are two kinds of leaders in our world: leaders who command and leaders who connect. I believe that transformation only happens when we apply learned information. Our shows are for working professionals, busy parents, on-the-go students, and aspiring leaders. So I want to ask you a question today. I want to ask you a couple of questions. I want you to think about this. Who are you following? How are you leading? These are some powerful questions that we need to ask ourselves as leaders every single day. Who are we following and how are we leading? So just an overview. Today is part 1 of the Lead Like Jesus series. It's going to be revolutionary. I am in love with it. I was inspired by the book, Lead Like Jesus. And today I'm going to answer the following 3 questions. Am I a leader? Am I willing to follow Jesus as my leadership role model? And how do I lead like Jesus? Again, am I a leader? Number 2, am I willing to follow Jesus as my leadership role model? And number 3, how do I lead like Jesus? So I want us to think about it. Just listen to the news, turn on the TV, and what do you see when you look at the news or when you hear it on the radio? Our world is in a desperate need for a different style of leadership. For example, you can look at the news, you can pick up the newspaper, and you can look on social media. Corporate leaders are starting to exploit, and it's being more and more revealed that they are exploiting privileges of positions. They're bringing ruin to employees and investors. And this one hit home for me. Church leaders experience crisis of integrity. They're starting to compromise their churches and inflicting a lot of church hurts. So there are those who are listening today that have probably experienced some church hurts in their lives. Families and personal relationships are drifting away from authentic connection, and they're more focused on building a social following. So think about that. We are now in an age where we thrive when we have more followers versus thriving when we have more authentic relationships and connections. The leadership model that people often experience is summarized by this popular opinion: it's all about me. Wow. Organizations and institutions promote these values: the reward of money, recognition, power increase as you move up the ladder of hierarchy, and you get more status and you get more territory. But if we're not intentional as leaders, we will fall into the trap of two things: self-promotion, which is a form of pride, where we're constantly trying to highlight our success and our achievements, or self-protection, a form of fear, where we are very diligent in protecting our image, our name, our reputation. So we wear this mask and we keep others at bay for the fear of being discovered. So you might be asking yourself, just heard all of those negative things and it's going on every single day. You might be asking yourself this question: is there hope? I want to tell you today that there is. The good news is that there's a better way. There's a perfect leadership role model that you can trust, and his name is Jesus. Disclaimer: our shows are faith-based and leadership-focused. So we look to learn from the past, apply to the present, and innovate the future. Rick Warren, the author of The Purpose-Driven Life, stated, Jesus modeled servant leadership by leading through an example and being a role model. Now, Jesus had over 2.1 billion followers. Think about that, which makes him the undisputed greatest leader of all time. He is the GOAT of leadership. That's why we should follow his leadership model. Keep in mind, there's a little over 7.5 billion people in the world, and over 2.1 billion people are followers of Jesus. If your mind's not blown, I don't understand. Think about that. He is the GOAT of leadership. There's a way to lead that is honorable and restores health and effectiveness to organizations and relationships. It's the way Jesus calls us to follow as leaders. And what Jesus teaches is to serve rather than to be served. So the first question that we talked about earlier: am I a leader? I want you to think about this. And if you're doing this, you, my friend, I'm speaking to you directly through this audio. You are a leader. Leadership is a process of influence. So anytime you seek to influence the thinking, behavior, or development of people in their personal or professional lives, you're taking the role as a leader. And leadership can be intimate as the words of guidance and encouragement to a loved one, or as formal as instructions passed down through an organization. Leadership can be nurturing the character of self-worth in a child. So you might be saying, but am I really a leader? If you fall under these categories, you, my friend, are a leader. Number one, you're a mother or a father with a child. Number two, you're a husband or a wife. Number three, you're a local pastor. Number four, you're a high school coach. Number five, you're a teacher. Number six, you're a public servant. So if you fall under any of these roles, you, my friend, are a leader. If you're a big brother or you're a big sister, you are a leader because you're influencing the thinking, the behavior, and the development of the people around you. So point number 2, am I willing to follow Jesus as my leadership role model? You might say, before I look into this Jesus thing as a role model, I need to understand what it actually means to lead like Jesus. So Jesus gave specific directions on how he wanted his followers to lead. You can find that in Matthew 20, verses 25 through 28. It says, Jesus called them together and said, "You know, the rulers of the Gentiles lord over them, with their higher officials exercising their authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for ransom for many." For the followers of Jesus, servant leadership isn't an option. It's a mandate. It's a way of life. It's a commitment, because servant leadership is to be a living statement of who we are in Christ, how we treat one another, and how we demonstrate love to the world. So point number 3, question number 3, how do I lead like Jesus? How do I lead like Jesus? So you may be asking yourself, okay, I like what you're saying here, David, but how do I lead like Jesus? Tell me how. You told me why I should lead like Jesus. You told me the benefits of leading like Jesus. So how do I do it? There's 2 aspects of leading like Jesus. Number 1, the first is understanding that leading like Jesus is a transformational journey. Number 2, the second and most important, which is the essence of this show, to learn and internalize the 4 pillars of leadership. So now, what are the 4 pillars, you may be asking? Number 1, the heart. Leadership is first a spiritual matter of the heart. So are we servant leaders or self-serving leaders? I'll ask that again. Are we servant leaders or are we self-serving leaders? Number 2, the head, which is our beliefs and our theories about leading and motivating people. Number 3, our hands. This is where we become a performance coach who praises the progress and redirects inappropriate behavior. And number 4, the habits. This is how we renew our daily commitment as a leader to serve rather than to be served. So, just to summarize and bring it all together back again, we talked about if you want to lead like Jesus, you have to answer these 3 questions. Am I a leader? Am I, number 1? Number 2 is, am I willing to follow Jesus as my leadership role model? Or number 3, how do I lead like Jesus? And leading like Jesus involves the alignment of these 4 pillars of leadership. Number 1, the heart. Number 2, the head. Number 3, the hands. And number 4, habits, which we'll be diving into each one of these throughout this series. You do not want to miss this. And if you're on the fence, I want to encourage you to have an open mind and an open heart, because these leadership principles, I truly believe that they are transferable. And I want to offer an encouragement as well, that there is hope to shifting the way you lead others and the way leaders lead around you. You can be a positive influence. And I want to also challenge you to keep that open mind and be receptive and see what sticks with your heart and resonate with you as you learn and hear from this series. Well, that's all for today's episode. Make sure you join us on every other Wednesday of each month for a new episode. We're on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And please, please, please leave me a review so that the podcast can reach many leaders And I want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me at prosper@shepherdrevolution.com. Again, prosper@shepherdrevolution.com. Next time, we're going to be talking about how is it to have a servant's heart. You do not want to miss it at all. It's going to be phenomenal. I'm not saying this just because I'm on the podcast. And I want you to remember something. If we as leaders are to set ourselves apart, we must start by leading through love, which always comes from the heart.
Thank you for joining us here at the Leadership Show. If you'd like access to additional resources and insight, text LeaderShift to 345-345 or visit theleadershiftshow.com. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please let us know and spread the word by giving us a review on iTunes. You can listen to our show on iTunes, Success Radio, Spotify, Google Play, and the IB Network on Spreaker.com. If you have a question for David, send it our way at prosper@shepherdrevolution.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on the Leadership Show.